Hank, a busy little Sunday evening for you, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm still kind of recovering from it with all the content we have over at Bama Online. But, yeah, you touched on it in the intro. This can't go overstated how big of a pickup this is for Alabama with Bryce Young flipping from USC to the Crimson Tide. Kind of checks all the boxes at the quarterback position that you look for. Obviously plays at a program like Mater Dei, kind of at Alabama at the prep level. Just a really big time pickup, and we have actually a really good breakdown on Bama Online right now from three of our colleagues at 247Sports, Barton Simmons, Steve Wilfong, and Charles Power, breaking down kind of everything he brings to the table both on and off the field. It's a really interesting read. I suggest if you haven't seen that, go to the website and read it right now because Bryce Young is a big time playmaker, and for Alabama to get him in a year that they needed to land a big time quarterback with Tua Tagovailoa potentially leaving, they got it done. So huge pickup, and certainly I think this is going to kind of start the wheels turning a little bit more on the recruiting trail for Bama.
We collaborated on Friday morning, Hank, you and I, on a Built by Bama online podcast, and we really talked a lot about Bryce Young because I guess it's been a week or so since you entered your crystal ball, your prediction that this would happen exactly the way it's happened, that Bryce Young would flip from Southern California to the University of Alabama. At the time of that podcast, I got the sense that there was a strong vibe going that what we saw over the weekend from Bryce Young actually showing up in Tuscaloosa to perhaps the weekend finishing with a commitment from Bryce Young was in play. What did you know at that time, and did it sort of play out exactly the way that you thought it might at that time?
Yeah, talking to people close to Bryce, they're very respectful to USC the whole process. They didn't want to make a huge show of going on visits as a committed recruit. They didn't want to, disrespect USC in any way. So they kept everything pretty low key. And there was the plan. If you go back to A-Day back in the spring, they were actually going to come out for A-Day. Something came up, they couldn't make it, and then they decided they just weren't going to take visits, while committed. They didn't want to make a whole media frenzy, which is what it would have become, and kind of what we saw it become on Saturday when it got out that he was on campus. But talking to people close to him, there was talks about a visit potentially happening this fall. I thought it made the most sense this past weekend, obviously with Mater Dei being on a bye week. He really doesn't have another open weekend to make a visit out to Tuscaloosa. So, it wasn't really ever, it was something we were sitting on a little bit, but, it's one of those things, you come on a visit to Alabama, people are going to see you. I think his family realized that was eventually going to happen, and sure enough, it happened before 8 a.m. on Saturday morning, and so, news broke that he was there, and the rest is history. So, had the sense that something, obviously, we knew something was happening with the visit, but, they were just trying to keep it as quiet as they could out of respect to USC until, that they couldn't hold it back anymore.
It's interesting, Hank. You talk about Bryce Young, as you said, checks all the boxes. But when we look at his measurables, this is a guy, 5'11", 185 pounds. Interesting that in 2019, we still consider that type of size as being a box checker, but I guess that's where we're at with the way the game is played now. Guys like Baker Mayfield, Tua Tagovailoa isn't 6'3", 6'4", for crying out loud. Talia certainly isn't 6'3", 6'4". Russell Wilson, guys like that. Kyler Murray most recently. And when I watch Bryce Young, I see some Kyler Murray in terms of his comfort level throwing the football. He just seems extremely at ease in that area. But he's listed as a dual threat guy. What does he bring to the game from that standpoint, Hank, in terms of his legs and his ability to extend plays, maybe?
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously this is a dual threat, but I think, honestly, his arm is kind of what's gotten him this far, but he certainly has that ability, that kind of unstructured type talent to where once you get outside the structure of a play, you can still make things happen in the same breath as, Kyler Murray, Baker Mayfield, Johnny Manziel, for even that matter. Just a guy that can make plays happen when they break down. Certainly has the arm talent, but he really hasn't we hadn't really seen him showcase his legs that much this year until he played St. Francis, which is one of the best high school defenses in the country a couple weeks ago. He rushed for over 100 yards and scored all 4 of his touchdowns on the ground. So he certainly he has that kind of tough grit to him. You look at him, he's 5'11", like I said, 183. He's not the biggest of guys, but he certainly plays bigger than he is, and his arm talent kind of makes up for any lack of physical stature he may have. It was actually kind of funny. I was talking to Reggie Grimes' dad this weekend, who was on an official visit to Alabama as well, former Alabama defensive lineman himself, and he said he met Bryce Young this weekend, and he didn't know who Bryce was before he met him. And Bryce told him he played quarterback, and Reggie's dad said he thought he said cornerback. He's like, I didn't think he was a quarterback just looking at him, but certainly we see Kyler Murray, a guy get picked number 1 in the NFL draft, who's actually shorter than Bryce Young. But I don't think we've kind of entered this era in recruiting rankings where that's the size isn't as big of a deal as the talent they have, both arm talent and just ability to make plays out of nothing. So he's the number 4 overall player in the country per 247 Sports, and I know some people think he might be the top overall prospect. So like I said, we can't talk enough about how big of a pickup this is for Alabama.
I like that there's not going to be a huge adaptation required in terms of system, because watching his tape at Mater Dei, you see a lot of the same stuff, or at least I do, Hank, that he's working in at the high school level that he's going to transition right into at Alabama. There's some RPO, there's some under center, there's some pro style concepts in play. He looks like he's going to be able to jump right into the Steve Sarkisian offense, assuming Steve's around for a second year. That's been a bit of a challenge for Alabama at the offensive coordinator spot. But talk about Sark and how important his presence was in all this with Bryce Young.
Oh, it was really important. I think you could probably make the argument that without Sark, this might not have gotten done. I think that they were always listening to Alabama, but when Sark came back on board earlier this year, I think that was kind of maybe a turning point in kind of them keeping up with Alabama. Up to that point, they liked Alabama. Obviously, they had visited, they had the offer. They were also listening to Oklahoma. There were some other schools kind of still in the picture, but once Sark got there and kind of prioritized Bryce Young as the top guy he wanted, the wheels started kind of turning on that whole process. And obviously, that family goes way back. Bryce's family goes way back with Steve Sarkisian, with the West Coast ties. They're very familiar with him. They're very comfortable with him. And so, a lot of people, even getting the commitment yesterday, a lot of the Alabama fans are still kind of talking about, well, if Clay Helton gets fired, what if they get Urban Meyer? Is that going to change Bryce's mind? And I don't see that happening just because of the relationship he has with Sark. I think that's one of the biggest things here. And obviously, the program, Nick Saban, the opportunity to come in and compete right away to start, those are all major factors. But this relationship with Sark and his level of comfort with him were really big factors in him flipping.
You talk about some other official visitors for the weekend. You mentioned Reggie Grimes Jr., a defensive end outside linebacker type that has been on Alabama's radar for a while now. I guess that worked out great. I mean, Reggie Grimes Sr. was a part of that 1999 SEC championship team at Alabama that was honored pregame on Saturday. So that timed out pretty good for the Grimes family, I guess. What did you gather from the other visitors to go along with Bryce Young from the weekend, Hank?
Yeah, I had a chance to catch up with Reggie's dad, and obviously they had a great time. I've never heard of an official visit going poorly, but it's always interesting to hear kind of how they go and who they met with, their player hosts, all that good stuff, and they certainly did. They had a good time, obviously coupled with getting honored at halftime. That was kind of a special moment for their family, certainly. And freshman linebacker Kevin Harris hosted him, so they got to spend time with him. Kyle Flood, Sal Sinceri, all those guys. And we're kind of in this kind of spot with Reggie Grimes where, obviously Bama's still recruiting him really hard. They like him a lot, but numbers are really tight. It's not really clear about kind of where he fits in at his position right now in this class. And so, not saying he's not going to end up in this class. He commits on November 28th, so that's a lot of time between now and then. Reggie's dad is not shy about saying he wants him to go to Alabama. That's where he wants his son to play. But Obviously, South Carolina, Florida State, Tennessee are in the picture as well. So we'll keep watching that situation. But, if Bama does press for him, I think, they're in a good spot to get him if they go for him. And then the other official visitor, Alfred Collins, is a guy we've talked about a few times over the summer and a little bit in the spring, four-star defensive lineman outside of Austin. He's actually, we talk about Reggie being an Alabama legacy. Alfred's actually a Texas legacy. His mom played basketball for Texas. And so this was his first visit out to Tuscaloosa this weekend. We're going to catch up with him here this afternoon. He's kind of been traveling all day yesterday and hadn't really had a time to do an interview. But Bama's in his top group of schools. He's been saying that he's been in contact with Nick Saban, Jeff Banks, his primary recruiter. And I heard the visit went great for him as well. So we'll keep an eye on him. I think, Texas is probably going to be a tough team to beat there just with his ties to the school and the proximity to home. But, Bama did impress him this weekend, and he's still listening. So certainly a recruitment we're going to be watching going forward.
And all that coverage with Hank and Tim Watts and our outstanding recruiting staff there at BamaOnline.com, you're going to find on the website right now at BOL. Hank's got an update on that official visit. Get more on that with Reggie Grimes Jr. at BOL right now. Hank, as we let you go here, so what's sort of the aftershock, the after effects, I guess you could say, of a commitment, potential after effects of a commitment from a guy like Bryce Young? We know the magnetizing effect a high-profile guy at a high-profile position like quarterback can have. You mentioned the tight numbers that Alabama's looking at right now to finish out this 2020 class. Chris Braswell, some other notable commitments in this class have strongly hinted on social media that there might be more to come here in the very near future. What do you sort of take from all that after this Bryce Young news?
Yeah, absolutely. We saw kind of the magnetizing effect Tua Tagovailoa had in 2017 with Judy Ruggs and Devontae Smith and even Tyrell Shavers back then, to get those guys on board and set with Alabama. So I think Bama is very happy with the receivers they have committed, and I think this is going to, pay big dividends with guys like probably Eric Gilbert. Obviously, I've been thinking Eric Gilbert's been leaning to Alabama even before Bryce officially flipped, and so I think this only helps kind of Bama's case there for him. I think this is going to have a lot of the uncommitted receivers, or even committed receivers, looking at Bama a little bit closer, more so than they already were. Guys like Kayshon Boutte, Arian Smith, Xavier Henderson, Brian Robinson. So I think Bama's going to have some guys trying to jump on board with them, and obviously we're seeing, like you just said, Chris Braswell hinting at stuff coming. Trayshawn Holden, the wide receiver commitment in California, he's been hinting for the last 12 hours about more commitments on the way. So I think Bryce is a guy these kids want to play with, and I think we're going to kind of see that. And Bama's going to be we've been saying it already before Bryce, but Bama's going to be in a tough spot where they have not enough spots for all the guys that want to come. And, in recruiting, that's a position you'd like to be in. So should be fun to see and should be fun to cover.
No doubt about it. Hank South, always a great job here with us on the program. Great stuff at BamaOnline.com right now. Hank, we appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
No problem. Thanks, Travis.